schedule very quickly. Just very quickly today. It's the first day, and not saying the second day is going to be a lot of fun too. We'll do some, the devotion in will start here shortly, and then we'll go into the opening and introductions. Two speakers, both of which I think you're going to find are amazing. So it's going to be a very interesting day. So Anne, you have the floor.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's great to see your faces and be with you all in this new year. The devotion that I'll offer today really is just short and a way to ground us and center us as we begin a new year. We'll think about newness here as I read some scripture and bring us back together just as a group. So can you all hear me okay? Good. So today for devotion, we'll do a practice called Lectio Divina. Some of you are familiar with this. This is just a way of listening to scripture. Our lives are so busy, and sometimes we don't make space for listening. And so this is a way of reading scripture where I will read the passage 3 times. I'll read it first, once, and then just leave some time for silence. I'll read it a second time. And after the second time, I'll invite you to share. You can do this in the chat, or you can share aloud a word or a phrase from the passage that sticks out to you. And then I'll read the passage a third time, and I'll ask a question that we can just spend a few minutes talking about. And the question will be in regards to newness and what's new in your life in this new year of 2022. So I encourage you, as Marianne says so well, put your feet on the floor, find your breath. I know the temptation is to do other things on the computer, but really our listening is helped with our focus, our singular focus, and we'll focus on this passage of scripture. I'm reading today from Isaiah 43. Won't read the whole chapter, but a couple chunks from the chapter. Again, I'll read it once. Give some time and space for silence. Read it a second time, invite you to share a word or a phrase that sticks out to you, and then share a third time, and I'll ask a question about newness. So feel free to close your eyes, get comfortable, whatever helps you to listen, okay? This is a reading from Isaiah 43. But now thus says the Lord, He who created you, O Jacob, he who formed you, O Israel, do not fear, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name, you are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and through the rivers, they shall not overwhelm you. When you walk through fire, you shall not be burned, and the flame shall not consume you, for I am the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, your Savior. I gave Ethiopia as your ransom. I gave Egypt as your ransom, Ethiopia and Seba in exchange for you. Because you are precious in my sight and honored, and I love you, I give people in return for you, nations in exchange for your life. Do not fear, for I am with you. I will bring your offspring from the east, and from the west I will gather you. I will say to the north, give them up, and the south, do not withhold, bringing my sons far away and my daughters from the end of the earth. Everyone who is called by my name, whom I created for my glory, whom I formed and made. I am the Lord your God, the creator of Israel, your king. Thus says the Lord, who makes a way in the sea, a path in the mighty waters, who brings out chariot and horse, army and warrior. They lie down, they cannot rise, they are extinguished, quenched like a wick. Do not remember the former things or consider the things of old. I am about to do a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it? I will make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. The wild animals will honor me, the jackals and the ostriches, for I give water in the wilderness, rivers in the desert to give drink to my chosen people, the people whom I formed for myself, that they might declare my praise. Listen again, Isaiah 43. But now thus says the Lord, he who created you, O Jacob, he who formed you, O Israel, do not fear, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and through the rivers, they shall not overwhelm you. When you walk through fire, you shall not be burned, and the flame shall not consume you. For I am the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, your Savior. I give Egypt as your ransom, Ethiopia and Seba in exchange for you. Because you are precious in my sight and honored, and I love you, I give people in return for you, nations in exchange for your life. Do not fear, for I am with you. I will bring your offspring from the east, and from the west I will gather you. I will say to the north, give them up, and to the south, do not withhold. Bring my sons from far away and my daughters from the end of the earth. Everyone who is called by my name, whom I created for my glory, whom I formed and made. I am the Lord, your Holy One, the Creator of Israel, your King. Thus says the Lord, who makes a way in the sea, a path in the mighty waters, who brings out chariot and horse, army and warrior. They lie down, they cannot rise, they are extinguished and quenched like a wick. Do not remember the former things, or consider the things of old. I am about to do a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it? I will make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. The wild animals will honor me, the jackals and the ostriches, for I give water in the wilderness, rivers in the desert, to give drink to my chosen people, the people whom I formed for myself, so that they might declare my praise. So I invite you, if you're more comfortable in the chat or aloud, just to name a word or a phrase in the text that sticks out to you as you hear this.
Do not be afraid.
Thank you. Great words in the chat. I will be with you. Do not remember the former things. I am about to do a new thing. Redeem, I am, path, way in the wilderness, call. These are great. Do you not perceive it? So listen one more time to the text. And the question I'd like you to think about as I read is, what new thing is God doing in your life in this new year? And then we'll share that at the end of the reading. But now thus says the Lord, he who created you, O Jacob, he who formed you, O Israel, do not fear, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name, you are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and through the rivers, they shall not overwhelm you. When you walk through fire, you shall not be burned, and the flame shall not consume you. For I am the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, your Savior. I give Egypt as your ransom, Ethiopia and Seba in exchange for you. Because you are precious in my sight and honored, and I love you, I give people in return for you, nations in exchange for your life. Do not fear, for I am with you. I will bring your offspring from the east, and from the west I will gather you. I will say to the north, give them up, and to the south, do not withhold. Bring my sons from far away and my daughters from the end of the earth. Everyone who is called by my name, whom I created for my glory, whom I formed and made. I am the Lord, your Holy One, the Creator of Israel, your King. Thus says the Lord, who makes a way in the sea, a path in the mighty waters, who brings out chariot and horse, Army and warrior, they lie down, they cannot rise. They are extinguished, quenched like a wick. Do not remember the former things, or consider the things of old. I am about to do a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it? I will make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. The wild animals will honor me, the jackals and the ostriches, for I give water in the desert, water in the wilderness, rivers in the desert, to give drink to my chosen people, the people whom I formed for myself, so that they might declare my praise. So I'd invite you again, just in the chat, again, if that's more comfortable, or if you'd like to share aloud, what new thing is coming for you in this new year? What new thing is God doing in your life?
So I think this is too much to write, so I'm just going to say it. When you first started reading, I was thinking of the scripture that says, my father owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. And this is kind of, and that's been on my mind for a while now. And I just think about how this affirmation of who God is and how he is for us, to us. And what really resonates is that whole idea of, the passage that talks about, I gave this in exchange for you because I love you. And so I think for me, as everybody else is making resolutions, I think for me, what I'm realizing is the new thing is growth, really, to stop focusing on those things that the would have, could have, wish I had of, and to think about they too are part of the experience and the foundation for this next place where God will guide me to or launch me into. And I'm really excited about that. So thank you for sharing this passage with us.
Oh, thank you so much, Monica, for sharing. That's it's really good insight on the text and on your own life too. So thank you. Others are posting in the chat. David, thanks for your comments. Thank you, Tiffany. New year, new footing, new focus. I love it. And it doesn't have to be anything major. Some of us may be making physical moves, but for some of us, it is just that renewal of focus and just an opportunity to reset. Thanks, Reagan, for posting here. It's great. New puppy, good for you, Mike. That's a lot of newness. That's great. Well, I hope this is an opportunity just again for you to reflect on all that's happening new in your life in this new year and what God is up to, right? The question always is, what is the Holy Spirit doing? And the Spirit is always in the business of making us new. So let's pray. And then I have a homework assignment for you for devotions tomorrow. Not surprising. Let's pray. God, we are so grateful that you love us, that you call us, that you guide us and make a way for us. I pray for this group on this call, for each person wherever they are, if they feel like they're in a wilderness time, or if they feel like a new horizon has just opened up for them that's so exciting. We pray for new roles and new puppies, for new focus, for all the things coming in this new year. We pray most of all, God, for health and safety, for all the people here, for all your people in the world, and that you would remind us every day of your promise that you are making us new, that you are making us more like Jesus every day. Ground us in our own sense of call, our sense of service and mission to serve you with all that we are. So be with us as we move into this time together. Bless our conversation and our learning. In your name, amen. So before we move on, just a homework assignment for tomorrow. Tomorrow we're going to do a kind of show and tell. And so I'd like you each to bring an item that is important to your sense of vocation. Okay, so it can be a physical item, it can be a song, it can be a poem, it can be a tattoo or a piece of jewelry, an article of clothing, something that grounds your sense of vocation or grounds your why. So when you see that thing, or you hold that thing, or you hear that thing, it reminds you of who you are called to be. Does this make sense? Something that you can engage with your senses, something you hear or touch or see, that is a reminder of who God has called you to be. And when we think about vocation, I'm not only thinking about your work. So it might be an item that reminds you of your work in that sense of vocation, but it might be an item that reminds you of another vocation that you have as a friend, as a neighbor, as a community member, as a parent, a spouse. Okay, so I'm leaving it open to you, but please bring an item, and then we're going to spend some time in small groups tomorrow sharing our show and tells. Thank you all for this time.
Thanks, Ann, as always. Marion and I were talking about a new year and all the things we do when we get around this time of year, and my son and I were thinking about this way too much, and how arbitrary January the 1st is in the sense of the universe and the big part of the world. But just to have a time, like you're saying, to sit back and reflect and say, hey, here's where we've been and here's where we are. It's a pretty useful thing to have. So thank you for that. Couple admin things we need to take care of. And again, Jessica's on. If you need something, please let her know. Brian, I see you're on. Great. Hopefully you can hear us. We have scheduled the closing retreat, and I'm going to show you this schedule for that. And we need to know how those dates work with you. So we're looking at Friday, May the 20th, arrive during the daytime, and then check in at 4 o'clock. So arrive in time to be in place at 4 o'clock, a full day Saturday, and then depart the morning of Sunday, May the 22nd. So arrive Friday, May the 20th, around lunchtime or so, and then depart the morning of Sunday, May the 22nd. Please send us an email at our Gmail address, lecknafellows@gmail.com, to say, hey, I can't make those dates. We want to take a look at potential conflicts. Any scheduling that happens around the end of May or beginning of June is fraught with all kinds of potential conflicts. Commencements, testing, all kinds of things. But please let us know if you have a conflict around that time. So as we begin today, we want to check in and kind of see how everybody's doing. So I thought of a question, and this fits perfectly into both this question of a new year and resolutions and God making a new thing through us. And that is, the question is, since our time in November until today, what have you learned in terms of your vocation or your vocation as a leader that's new since our time in November? What's come forward, or what have you had to do, or what have you taken away from the November retreat that has become a new part of you as a leader? So I'm going to ask that we do that verbally as we go around the room. And so I'm opening the floor for y'all. A new thing.
I can, excuse me, jump in, break the silence. I'm getting to see how the sausage is made. And so I'm working with Lauren as our consultant and other folks. I'm the chair of the Provost Search Committee. And so the behind the scenes, I've done lots of searches in my department and in support of other departments, but I've never done one at such a high level and chaired it. And so this has been a really interesting and educational experience for me as I look at how these larger high profile searches go. And I'm learning a ton and really finding it quite fascinating and enjoyable. So the skills of managing a group of really committed but super busy and too large of a committee of faculty and staff is a challenge and a very tight timetable. And so there's lots of things I'm learning since, or using, that I learned in November. Thanks.
Good point. Thanks, Tim.
I'll go. I learned a lot just about the Concordia University system, which has really informed conversations that I've had with colleagues on the Ann Arbor and Wisconsin campuses that I hadn't really thought about certain issues or struggles within the system as a whole. I always thought perhaps they were maybe a little bit more central to our campuses. So just speaking with colleagues and hearing other people's stories about what their Concordia institutions are doing, how they're innovating, how they might be struggling was really informative for me.
I've been learning something very small, which is to better choose which hills I would like to die on, and not argue too much on the ones that I know I'm going to die on that hill if I try to argue it. So just kind of better decision making on my part about which avenues I think are the best and most important to pursue.
Mine actually is very close to what you just said. For me, it's about decision making and being very purposeful, even more purposeful in my decision making and deciding where I spend my energy, because higher ed is a beast. And it can, I think a lot of us are spread too thin. And so being able to kind of pull it in and really focus on what serves me, what allows me to refine some of my leadership skills, and then kind of where are those voids, those areas of learning. And so I'm really trying to just focus on kind of those three areas. How does this serve me professionally and those sorts of things? So
mine is actually really close to Monica's in the previous. I've been learning to, I've written down these like 4 corners of myself, right? Things that I'm interested in and things that that serve me, right? And I'm only trying to do things in those four corners, right? And to build up those four corners and to really focus on those four corners. And so I've been trying to get more precise in what I do. Another thing that I've been learning has been that like the pastor side of myself and the professor side of myself need to be very different, because you can move a lot faster in ministry than you can in higher education. A lot faster. Like you say the thing, like you're the pastor, you say the thing, and then the thing can happen. It can materialize like that, right? But in higher ed, you can say the thing and the thing will happen maybe in a decade or so. And so I have to learn about that. I have to slow down, and I'm learning to play on a qualified team. And I'm happy to play on a qualified team.
Thanks, Gerard. Great points.
So I've been in conversation with my dean, who's stepping out of his role. I become dean next July, and we've been asking the question, all right, who's behind me? Who can step in if I should get called away to another position, which has raised the broader question, and to stays here, please. Why are we finding it so difficult to find faculty who will fully engage in all of the aspects of faculty governance and collegiality within the institution? So I don't know that I've learned something except to ask the question in hiring, does the shiny new professor object who impresses the committee really have what it takes to be a good colleague and contribute to the broader intellectual life and functioning of the institution or not? And my dean and I are beginning to suspect that we haven't been as strong on that suit in our hiring over the past 5 years as we should have been. And as a new dean, that raises questions for me since we have a few retirements coming.
Thank you, David.
I really appreciated what others of you have said. When I articulated my calling statement at our retreat in November, I talked about sharing generously. And then I shared with Marianne in our last coaching session that I had an experience where I realized I needed to be better about setting boundaries, and that it's okay to say, I actually don't have the bandwidth to share in this case or in this case. That sharing generously doesn't need to be all the time and with everyone, but it can be focused on the places where I want to have an impact and doesn't need to then bleed over into other areas.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, great points.
I'll share. I have actually really used my little puzzle piece as both a tool to spark some conversation with both my direct report and my supervisor and those I work closely with, but also as a tool of sort of focus. And I think within the theme of being able to focus on, your calling and making sure that what you're doing is in service of that and focused on your values and your strengths, but also just as a way to engage with people about how we work together. And then secondly, I think I've really come back to the portion of adaptive leadership about working with change and culture that we did the reflection on, and some of my notes about that have been helpful.
Thanks, Tiffany. Great points.
Hi, everybody. My experience with the retreat in November was coupled alongside a few other kind of big experiences for me. And so it's hard to kind of tease out what was what. But I think the thing that I'm learning has something to do with the thing that I sense God is doing new in my life too, is just how to be really conscious of the decisions I'm making to stay out of the weeds if I can, and out of the busyness to create space for more kind of deeper thinking and deeper work that's more creative and generative. And so we'll see how that goes, but I'm hopeful.
Thank you, Kate.
Hi, all. Yeah, to piggyback on what Kate said, I think for me, it's going to be an intentional effort to stay out of the weeds. Like many of you, I'm stretched thin. My office has been reduced over the last few years, so I often find myself in the weeds. And I like to lead from the front. It's kind of a natural inclination for me to do so, but I do need to do more strategic and creative thinking this year, not just about my own office, but about our enrollment project in general here at PLU. So yeah, the November retreat was good for me to be able to kind of get up on the balcony and look at things, you know, from a much higher distance. So
I love HIFIS's in the adaptive model, this whole idea, the visual aspect of getting onto the balcony and then listening to the music. It's an incredible tool. We probably still have a few more that want to jump in.
I'll jump in. The November retreat was very timely for me on a personal, practical level, because within a couple weeks of that, I ended up getting tapped for a couple new opportunities. I'm currently deliberating a call as principal at Emmanuel St. Michael in Fort Wayne, Indiana. That's a pre-K through 8 school of about 400 students and a faculty staff of 52. So this came out of the blue, wasn't looking for anything like that. I'm also being seriously considered for the Missouri District Education Executive position based out of St. Louis. Those combined with my current role, it is hard to find 3 more different jobs or 3 more different communities than St. Louis, Seward, and Fort Wayne. So discernment is not easy these days. The central question I keep asking myself, though, and tying into the Isaiah text, is how we declare his praises and whether God's asking me to declare those praises broadly or deeply, and what would it look like to do both?
Thanks, Ben.
I can go. I talked about this a little bit while we were at the end of the retreat, but I think for me, it kind of just boils down to a renewed sense of confidence. I think that like many of us, COVID and policies and being the one to often have to deliver bad news had led me to a place of questioning a little bit whether or not I was really leading to the best of my ability and being
Hey, Reagan, we lost you there for a minute.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we got you now. Go ahead.
That's all right. I think I got most of it out. So
We probably missed the very end. So
it just all sort of boiled down to a renewed sense of confidence.
okay, great. Okay, I'm not sure. Do we have any folks left?
I can
go.
share.
Oh, go,
Sorry,
Lauren.
go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Hi, everybody. I just wanted to share one takeaway that I'm carrying into the new year is to not be afraid to ask questions, even if I'm being pressed for a quick decision, to be more comfortable slowing things down so that I can ask questions and make sure I'm getting as much information as possible so that I don't lead a group into even more chaos. So that's one thing that I'm taking with me.
Great, Lauren. Thank you.
I
This
can
is Carrie Whittier. I'm on the phone. And I just wanted to say that for me, the retreat was very affirming in the fact that I think I am exactly where I'm supposed to be at this exact point in time, professionally and personally. So I think that was very comforting coming back from the retreat, and that has continued to be affirmed just with some things happening at the university and some potential opportunities that are continuing to present themselves. So I think that part is very exciting, and going into a new year, very excited about the semester ahead.
Thanks, Carrie.
I'm good now. Hey everyone. I came back from the retreat into probably one of the busiest weeks that we have in our semester, and I came back with such a strong sense of clarity in regards to team formation, and made some decisions that I had probably sat on for way too long, just in fear of kind of how those decisions would be perceived or played out. And so I took action on them within a week, and have felt a lot more at peace because of that. And so I appreciate that sense of that view of the balcony and that sense of clarity that I came back with.
Thanks, Laura.
Hey folks, this was a great opportunity to sit back and reflect, and I reflected a lot from the retreat, and I really, jumped on the trust model, and I really I kind of just put it into place with my staff, and really starting to work with them and trust with them, not only to trust me, but when others on the staff. So it's really been very helpful and reflective for us to kind of work stronger together as we're moving together fast in the university and a lot of big things. And we have a lot of focal points of that movement. And so just giving my staff that sense of confidence and that trust with each other. So it's been very helpful.
Thanks, Mark. Any more folks want to go? I'm not sure if we got everybody or not, since I wasn't checking you all off, so that's a good thing. Okay.
George and Jeffrey?
Oh.
Sure, I can go. I was trying to think of something fun to say. There's a lot of great thoughts have been shared. My takeaway, I kind of took the academic approach and start hitting the books. I reread Simon Sinek's book right afterwards. I picked up Brene Brown's books, and then that led me into some other almost research type of projects that I started doing, just to get more into the literature, which benefited my students because I was able to bring all of that back into the classroom just randomly. I already talked about Sinek already in all the classes I was teaching last fall right after the retreat. So they got a benefit of a more in-depth view of it. But yeah.
Okay. Thanks, George. Jeffrey?
I have thought a lot about change management. I'm sure we've all read the same articles about the Great Resignations, and we've had a lot of folks over the Christmas break move on to different opportunities, and just trying to grapple with that. I don't know what part in the retreat. I'm sure I took it away from the retreat, but the idea that keeps going around in my head is that really, like, the why, the how, the what, the details aren't as important as helping people move forward to thinking about their own roles and their own vocations. Get lost a lot in the, well, why did this happen, or why is this person not here anymore? And that is important, and those things need to be acknowledged. But I think trying to help people redirect of what the future holds moving forward. I'm sorry, just it's been a weird 2 weeks. restful in some ways and stressful in others. But that's what I'm grappling with right now.
Thanks, Jeffrey. And Richard, I'm not sure, had you had time to jump in?
Not yet. So for me, I think since coming back, it's been a reminder to slow down and to be more aware of what's going on around me, spend more time listening, and make more thoughtful and say deliberate choices. Yep.
Okay, thank you, sir. And we'll go around the horn one more time. I think, Lauren, did you see anybody else we missed?
I think everyone on my screen has said at least something. Yeah.
Great. So
except for Diana and Mary Ann.
Diane and Mary Ann? And Anne.
Well, I'll jump in. I was so marked by the power of the room and all of the gifts and talents that you brought into that articulation of them, of your strengths, values, and callings. And that's such hopeful space. I think in this time you cling to that kind of hopeful space, the way in the wilderness, if you will, right? Because I think we are all a part of that. So that for me was both grounding and very, very hopeful. One of the things I've thought about a lot since those moments in November with all of you. And there, there's new chapter opening in my life too, trying to pay attention to what that will be and where it is rooted. And so I'm really thankful, Anne, for the devotion this morning, because it just brought me to that place again. And again, the power of being within this community.
Mary Ann?
Myself, I would piggyback what Mary Ann was saying, but the piece that kind of touched my heart was truly thinking about the richness of each of your puzzle pieces that contribute to the greater whole, that none of us can do this alone. Because I've worked with this puzzle piece for a long time, but it felt kind of like about me. And then when you do it with the whole group and you have the richness of everyone's gifts to bring to the table to that greater whole, it feels hopeful. I feel like there's things exciting to come, possibilities that all of you will manifest with taking that puzzle piece into the world.
Thanks, Diana. Hey, Lauren, you want to throw yours in?
Nice to be back with you all. I think one of my great memories of November is that we were together, and what a difference that made and what a rich experience that was. And it's one of the few times that I've been with a group of this size, in 2 years. And so it was really, forgive me, it was a big deal. And really was a rich time, made such an impact on me. As I was listening to you talk this morning, I couldn't help but reach back and pull out the workbook from November, where we said what we were trying to accomplish in November was 3 key learning outcomes. One is that leadership begins with you. And each of your comments today, growing out of the devotions that Ann did, talks about how it comes back to us. And that's where it all begins, with understanding the core and our little unique piece of the puzzle. And then secondly, that it's a team sport, that you went home You didn't operate alone. You went back into a context, into a community, into an institution, into an office. And you began once again interacting with each other and those you call colleagues and friends and families, and leadership is a team sport. And then that leadership serves a higher purpose, that we're all about this in one way or another, trying to benefit others, benefit our organizations, benefit the world, and serve God in the process. And that sense of vocation, I think, was very much a part of your comments this morning. So it begins with you. It's a team sport, and it serves a higher purpose. We talked about that in November, and we'll want to remember those, I think, as we move through the program that we have set out today and tomorrow.
Thanks, Lauren. And you want to pitch in?
Yeah, I would say the biggest takeaways for me were revisiting the courage and vulnerability conversations. And just knowing that being more aware of my own vulnerabilities and knowing, kind of discerning where I need to gird up my loins and have some courage to say some things that I need to say and do some things that I need to do. And I've been able to do that some, and I'm proud of myself for doing that. And yeah, so concretely, I mean, one of the things, and I've emailed a few of you about this, looking for book recommendations, but I'm working on a sabbatical proposal. And I've been sort of dragging my feet on this, and I'm really clear that I need it. And I think I've been dragging my feet because I haven't really, is my proposal good enough, that sort of thing. But to just have the courage to do it. And so that's felt like a good next step for me.
Thanks, Ann. And I'll pitch mine on the table here, and it's a little bit of combination of Lauren and Mark's. What's interesting is when we do this virtual thing, and it applies to people that are doing business virtually or people that are trying to teach classes, is this question of trust. And we had our first meeting in November, and I take this, do not be afraid, right? That was the first time we were actually physically together, and how being physically together, at least to me, brings about maybe a shorter path or a clearer path to building trust, to the point where by the time I felt the retreat, everybody was being pretty straightforward about what they thought and the learnings they had from our excellent group of speakers. So I think that's one of my key takeaways. Virtual world's great, and we need to do some things that way, but that November in-person retreat was very impactful and very important, I thought, in terms of building trust. And that's one of the ones I'm going to take away in my hip pocket. Okay. What we're going to do now is 10 o'clock is when Pat Thiessen comes to talk to us. He's head of Lutheran Social Services in Minnesota. So I would suggest we take between a 15 and a 20-minute break, store up on more coffee and tea, or a bagel, or whatever you may want to get, but just be on a little bit before 10, so we get through everybody logging back on, and can start right away with what Pat has to say for us. Any questions?
A little before 11.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, not 10. 10's well past. Sorry about that. Tom's still in another time zone. Maybe that's what's going on.
11 in Central. Yeah.
Yeah, 11 o'clock. So that would be a great thing. And Jessica, if you would pause the recording, please. See you all shortly.
Finished a little early we finished a little early in the last hour, so we're just waiting for everybody to come back online again.
Perfect.
Then I'll do a little intro and throw it your way.
Okay, sounds good. I like your background.
all the Lutheran College and University presidents are meeting in Marco Island, Florida today. And so in honor of them, I chose this background. And a reminder to all of you fellows who aspire to be presidents, one day you could be in Marco Island, Florida.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what happens when you get to be a president.
How did I end up here? I got snow everywhere. I guess I wasn't qualified to be a president of.
Yeah.
Well, that's probably the short answer. because I wasn't good
Don't
enough.
speak too soon, Pat, just don't tempt fate there, okay?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Actually, I'm coming to you from 106 Spring Street in Decorah, Iowa, where our daughter and son-in-law live, and Mary Ann's
And it's
upstairs.
unsettling for me to look at him and know he's in the basement and I'm
Yeah.
upstairs.
Mary Ann's in the beautiful sunlit dining room, and I'm in the office, which is in the lower level of the
Yes, the lower level.
the garden level.
The garden level.
But I do have a fireproof escape window if it gets hot, tough down here. So, how we doing? I see quite a few back. If you aren't back, would you raise your hand? Yeah. It's 10:58, so we'll give everybody a couple of minutes if we can, and we'll start right at the top of the hour.
Later in the month, there's a LSA CEO Summit in Florida. I have a feeling that's not gonna be in person. It's supposed to be, but I'm starting to wonder. I have some acquaintances who are stuck in Florida, and not a bad place to be stuck in if you're from Minnesota.
Yeah.
But 5 days trying to get back. So many canceled the flight. There's nobody able to work at the airport.
Really?
And yeah, it's
Yeah.
tough traveling, I guess.
Is your LSA group going to try and meet in person?
You know, there's a meeting Friday, and I'm on this little committee, then I'll be interested. Right now it is, yeah. I haven't heard anything different.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I was just reading this morning that a lot of the associations and all that have meetings now are, charging forward and talking about masking and social distancing and hoping that people can stay safe.
yeah.
Okay, it's 11 o'clock, so let's go ahead and get started. If you'll recall at our November retreat, we had a couple of very special speakers that we called exemplars, people who are in the trenches leading away and setting an example that we think is very much important and worth sharing with you, and giving you a chance to interact with these established leaders at a very high level. The Thrivent Fellows class of 1819 featured two participants from Lutheran Social Services of Minnesota, and one of those was Pat Tuason. At the time of his participation in the Fellows Program, he was the Chief Operating Officer and the Chief Financial Officer for Lutheran Social Services of Minnesota. Pat's predecessor, Jody Harpstead, who was also a participant in this program a decade or so ago, was summoned by our governor to be the commissioner of, is it Human Services or Social Services for the entire state of Minnesota. And when Jody left to accept that appointment, the question was who was going to lead Lutheran Social Services of Minnesota. And funny things happen when you participate in this program. And Pat was found standing in line. And rather than go out and do a search, the Board of Lutheran Social Services wisely concluded that they had Jody's successor already in their midst, in the person of Pat. I'm privileged to serve on Pat's board. So I've had a chance to not only see Pat during his time as a fellow, but also to watch the leadership that he is bringing to LSS of Minnesota, which is one incredible going organization. With 20 some lines of service, that as a new board member, 1 year in, I'm still trying to learn what they all are. We have a presence in all 87 counties in Minnesota. We have an annual expenditure budget of Pat 130, something like that, million.
We're over 2 million, or I mean 200 million.
200 million this year.
Yeah.
Just a huge, huge, huge operation doing incredible good in this world, as are the LSS organizations around the country. It's one of the great stories of Lutherandom, I think. So Pat was a great member of that cohort of 1819, and I keep reminding Pat that he did one of the best leadership projects that I think we've seen in our time with the program, which was all about how he was going to evaluate and assess each of these remarkably diverse lines of services that are offered by Lutheran Social Services. It was really a model of a visionary leadership project for the program. So we're delighted that Pat now is back, not as a fellow, as an alum of the Fellows Program, but also in his role as CEO of Lutheran Social Services of Minnesota. And he's going to share that story and his approach to leadership, and be available for questions and answers when he's done. So please lead on, Pat. We're delighted to have you here.
Well, thanks, Lauren. It's nice to see everybody again. And I hear it's a large cohort this year. I hope you're enjoying it as much as I did. I really took a lot of valuable things away from it and had a wonderful time, and I'm very grateful to the LECNA program. So happy New Year to everybody. And I would like to share a little bit about what I learned and how we are doing things. Maybe Tom, if we could bring the presentation up. Look at that. Thank you. So here's what I thought would make sense for today. Maybe a little brief background on LSS, just so you know what I'm referring to in a couple spots. And then the team, the LECNA team, had asked that I talk about the why, the who and how of what you're studying, and then adaptive leadership. So I'll have a couple examples of that. And then, yeah, hopefully there's some time for questions. So this is my approach to leadership, and I'm sure you have your own. I did incorporate some things from LECNA that I'd like to point out as we go along too, that it was very helpful for me. Diana was my coach. So you can blame her for my various misdeeds since then, but maybe we could, so I'll do these three things, and maybe we'll start with a little bit of background on LSS of Minnesota on the next slide. There we go. I would offer that there's three touchstones for LSS to understand it. The first is our mission statement. And I will say that compared to some organizations that I've worked for over the years, we keep this really in front of us. It's on everything we do, and it really settles any questions about what should we do next, as we go back to the mission quite a bit. And that is to show the love of Christ for all people. We always underline that word all. It's very important. What did I hear the other day? It was a Lutheran thing. We serve all the people that God creates. And so no matter what kind of person, it was the framework that the Lutheran pastor was offering me. The second is our LSS vision, and that's that all people have the opportunity to live and work in community with full and abundant lives. And that's kind of the LSS model, is taking people from the outskirts and inviting them, giving them what they need to change their own lives and inviting them into their community. And then the third has become really important. I'm sure in your organizations, I suspect anyway, that you're dealing with challenges in staffing, et cetera. And so we keep the employee vision in front of us as well. And that is that LSS employees have deeply meaningful work that changes lives, the opportunity for their unique gifts to shine and grow, and abundant and balanced lives. That's something we're living into, especially the abundant and balanced lives. I wouldn't want to say that we've achieved that, but we do this employee survey every other year that is anonymous, and LSS employees, 94% rate the highest possible rating in agreement on their work is deeply meaningful. And with that, we can get a lot of really cool things done. We try to keep the mission in front and the people served in front of all our decisions. Maybe we could go on to the next slide then. Keep continuing with the three. There's three buckets of service broadly. So Lauren mentioned there's 25-ish lines of service that are all independent and yet centralized in our backroom operations and in our strategies and planning and all the supports. But the three buckets are services for individuals with intellectual disabilities. And there our goal is to have people live in the most independent, greatest sense of community possible. So that's an industry that's been under change from institutions to group homes to living in communities. And LSS of Minnesota has been a pioneer and continues to be a pioneer of what we call my life, my choices, independence. And then our second bucket of services is for older adults. We're the largest provider of nutrition for seniors, foster grandparent, guardianship services, caregiver respite. Say my spouse had Alzheimer's or something, and I just was a primary caregiver. LSS will come in with a volunteer to give me a break. And also a great use of technology we're seeing there is giving iPads so that we can start a network for them and fight isolation. They can say, my spouse is starting to do this. Has anybody noticed that? Or we've had people attend, weddings of grandchildren online, et cetera. And then the third bucket is a real potpourri of a lot of things. The children, youth, and families, there's mental health counseling, financial counseling, a lot of homeless youth. We're the largest provider of homeless youth services, employment, refugee services, housing, and a new one that we acquired last year is deaf and hard of hearing statewide. So if a child is born with deaf or hard of hearing, we set the family up with how to learn sign language, work with the schools, give them the same opportunities as any other child. Maybe we could go to the next slide. I think one of the other things to understand about LSS before I get into my own leadership observations is our scale. One of the larger, probably largest social service of our kind anyway. We serve 1 in 65 Minnesotans every year. Lauren already mentioned we're in all 87 counties, and we go into some other states too. The big thing I would offer is that it's a movement of 25,000 people. We have 3,000 employees, 10,000 volunteers, and about 12,000 supporters. So I find it easier, just I guess this is my first observation on leadership, to think of it as a movement rather than an organization. I think that opens up one's thinking to think of yourself as leading a movement rather than just an organization. So now maybe we'll get into the why, the who, and the how of my approach. So the first why, and this is kind of goofy, but so I was at Coca-Cola and I loved Coca-Cola. I was, getting some promotions and doing okay. This will show you how long ago this was. I was the youngest, what was it, a director or something at Coca-Cola. So it was a long time ago if I was the youngest. But because of that, I got stuck I'll say, doing the United Way campaign. And United Way had not been doing a great growth job with Coca-Cola. So I thought, if we're going to do it, let's do it. And so I found this guy, Crusher Kowalski, was a professional wrestler back in the 50s and 60s. And then he became an advocate for, what was it? Oh, like youth services, Boys and Girls Clubs, I think it was. And so he was a United Way presenter. And I found that when we used him, his results were fantastic, just off the chart giving. And it was a tough crowd. There's a lot of, Teamsters who didn't really, care. They didn't feel a big affinity to Coca-Cola, let alone to United Way. But Crusher could really deliver a room. And so I did them all the time. I brought him in 25 times, middle of the night, to catch different shifts in the factories and all this stuff. And I think I got brainwashed, I started thinking, these stories are amazing. I remember him telling a story about a kid in a gang who had a spider web tattooed on his forehead, and how Boys and Girls Club got that removed so he could get a job because nobody would hire him with it. And it just kind of wore on me. And I thought, I work really long hours and it's going well. I like it. But at the end of the day, I'm doing it all just to sell more sugar water. And that just wasn't satisfying. So sure enough, I started to look for a nonprofit to get into, and ended up going to United Way first, and then made a couple transition, loved each job. I've been really blessed to love all my employment opportunities. And but LSS in Minnesota was the right place for me. And I've been there 15 years. Actually, I'm coming up at LSS, only 2 as CEO. Maybe we could go on to the second why I would offer. This is work from LECNA, and it was the integrated leadership model that they helped me with. And you've probably already heard, maybe Lauren, you could give me a thumbs up. Have they already talked to Daryl, is it Jodok? Have they already heard the purpose and calling presentation? Yep. So I won't spend a lot of time on this, but it was very helpful. The LECNA leaders helped me get to an integrated leadership model. And I won't go through all this, but I found in reflecting, and hopefully you're able to do this as well, my purpose, as I put it anyway, or as I understand it, was to be who God created me to be for others. I think that last part was really important to me, to what end? You can find out who you're supposed to be in life, but to what end? What does that accomplish? And I have found a calling, I would offer, if we go down to the lower bubble there, of I like to have my life ordered by joy, and that's an acronym for an order of operations, Jesus, others, and then yourself. And so I enjoy having a job I really love. We take the mission really seriously. We take ourselves less seriously. I've heard the thing, try to be the type of person you want to work with. And we try to instill that at LSS. I also heard it phrased, what is it? Try to be the person your dog thinks you are. I kind of like that one too. So, but at the same time I was going through LECNA, I was reading a book. I don't know if anybody's read Dr. Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning. And he was a Freudian psychiatrist before World War II in Vienna, and was very much into the Freud's determination that at birth, that decides, your experiences in childhood decide your path in life. And he came to a different conclusion as he was actually sent to a concentration camp, a Nazi concentration camp. It's a little book. I would recommend it if you're curious about purpose and calling. But his determination there was, even as they wiped out his family and they tortured him, he was developing something he called logos therapy, is that if you find your purpose, that's where your joy is going to be. And you should really think about what your purpose is and your calling. So, and I know Dr. Daryl's already done this, so I won't spend much time on it, but he found that he was trying to figure out why some people made it through the camps and some people didn't. And he found that the people who had a why, had a purpose, they made it. A family member to go back to, somebody to take care of. The others sadly did not. So again, my eventual point is just self-realization for its own sake is very limited to me, but if it's for others, that I find more meaningful. Maybe we can go on to the next slide, please. So then, again, we intersect, at least I intersect with faith, and I started a family, and then work was very important to me. And then more and more community. It became less and less about me. And yet I didn't want to be a different person with my kids than I was on a committee at church or as a CFO at that time or whatever it was. So I was looking for something to kind of unify these things. And this is what made sense to me. Maybe we can go to the next slide, is a study of principles and virtues. I came to the belief that there are certain God-embedded, unchanging principles like fairness and quality of, or value of hard work, fairness, justice, resilience, courage. And I could tell that no matter which of these 4 bubbles I was going in, if I messed something up, I could think, oh, I wasn't courageous enough in that situation. That's why that went badly. Or in another one, maybe I should have been more patient in this one. So I started reading about both these principles and virtues as a response to kind of navigating these unchanging rules. You put little kids in the room, they know instinctively about fairness. You say something, somebody takes a toy away, they kind of relate to a fairness. I think it's really embedded, hard to explain in a short presentation, but I started looking at the original meanings of virtues, and virtues were really different in their original meanings, at least by the Greeks, and every culture has a study of and faith traditions of virtues, etc. And so I started looking at it more closely, and I found it as a real unifying factor. It's not that I ever became virtuous, but I could really see how looking for the unchanging principles behind things increase the chances of my projects and other people's projects being successful. Maybe we can go on to the next slide. So to eventually get back to the leadership topic, the two from my work at LECNA and the reflection and small group activities, I came to the conclusion that for leadership, there are 2 really important virtues. One is magnanimity, and the other is humility. And I like these 2 quotes. Everyone is made for greatness. Leadership is the practice of lifting others' gaze to that reality that they're created for greatness in order to achieve something more important than themselves. And then I always like this one. You were created for greatness, not for comfort. So magnanimity, again, has been kind of watered down. Right now it means somebody being magnanimous. Oh, they're very charitable or they're friendly. The real original meaning of the word in Greek was a proper seeing greatness in others and yourself. So seeing excellence in their abilities and recognizing it. So when I'm trying to lead somebody, I'm very conscious of the fact that they have greatness, and I have to listen first to what their dreams are and what they want to accomplish and really go from that. And then the second one's humility. That's also been watered down. Right now it means kind of self-deprecating and not thinking highly of oneself sometimes. And that's not what it meant. What that meant originally was a proper position or posture between you and God, and then you and your fellow person. So that proper relationship is what it originally meant. And we can go on to the next slide. So I have one of these on my desk. It's a bamboo tree, and I'm not a plant person. I'm surprised the thing's still alive. But the interesting thing about it is I have it on my desk to remind me about growing people and the approach to growing services as well. A Chinese bamboo tree, you have to water it every day. You plant it, you water it, nothing happens for 5 years. I mean, literally nothing. And then in that 5th year, it can grow up to 90 feet. It grows really fast. I mean, and it'll go 90 feet in 5 weeks. So my point being is you can't always judge. You know, you look for the good in people or the good in a service. So if you're doing a new pilot, and just be patient with it, but take care of it every day. And then it's also the importance of listening first. You know, when I was with Coke, eventually one of my jobs was to go into underperforming divisions, and I'd have 12 to 18 months to either close them or to turn them around to where they weren't underperforming anymore. And I never had to close one. And the answer was always there already. There was somebody, whether it be in a warehouse or a clerk or somebody who knew how to fix things, and they were just not being listened to and had grown tired of it, of telling people how to fix things and seeing nothing happen with it. So I think listening to people is really important. I've never had an original idea in my life. So I got really lucky that somebody in those divisions already knew what to do and could tell me about it. So, but just be waiting for that 5th year in people and doing what you can. Don't expect it to turn around immediately. Next slide, please. All right, you guys are too young to know who this is. This is Lawrence Welk. I'm too young to know who this is. I think I used to watch reruns when I was a little kid of this. I don't know why. But anyway, humility as a leadership style. I'm at a point now where people ask me what my leadership style is, and I had never given it any thought. Lawrence Welk was already the #1, you know, they had a TV show on, I think it's the longest TV show in history, I'm not sure. But it was every Saturday night and they do these corny songs and dances. And he was an accordion player. He led his band by playing the accordion. And at one point, even though he was already very successful, this guy over Lawrence's right shoulder is a guy named Myron Florin. Myron is a way better accordion player than Lawrence Welk ever was. And so Lawrence hired him and he put him out front all the time, gave him every solo, you know, rarely ever played the accordion again. Myron got the spotlight and became a big star. And you know, Lawrence was asked, you know, why would you hire somebody that's better than you? That seems really stupid. How do you feel when people say, oh, Myron Florin's a way better accordion player than you ever were? And Lawrence said, it really hurts my feelings. It really hurts my feelings. It makes me very sad. I cry all the way to the bank. Well, he was, you know, the leader of the band. So it made all the sense in the world for him to get somebody better than him because he would end up still as the leader and he grew in popularity. So my eventual point is, if I have a leadership style to the degree I do, I like surrounding myself with people smarter than me, which isn't that hard to do. I have people smarter than me, hire them, and then I just try to ask really good questions. You know, why is this happening? Why is that happening? And I think a good question is hugely important, more important than sometimes ideas. I like to surround myself with people who have really good ideas and really good technical expertise. Next slide, please. So here's the how, just to review. Again, ancient Greeks or any one of the cultures that follows virtues and principles, they didn't invent that, they discovered it, just like, you know, discovering gravity or anything else. It pre-existed, at least to my belief. And it's not just a Western culture thing either. You know, I'm a big fan of Native American cultures and read that. Almost every culture has studied these principles, and the alignment to these unchanging principles has always been important to them. So I understand we can't teach you know, religion in schools, and nor would I think that would be a particularly good idea. but it would be kind of nice to have a cross-cultural, very dynamic lesson in how principles and virtues have existed in so many cultures since the beginning of time, and teach kids that. That's my only suggestion for the day. So, you know, it's in Buddhism, Islam, Hindu, Christianity, native cultures, all of them. So I found it very compelling. I find this quote very compelling. We are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. And so not having, what this has given me is not having a huge divide on how I'm going to be with my kids versus how I'm going to be in a group or some kind of committee versus how I'm going to lead. It's just given me an integrated model that I can see. I can tell how things are often going to go by how well I'm aligning with things like patience and humility and a lot of them. You know, there's a lot of, I mentioned that there's different words that have gotten watered down through the years. Prudence was one. Prudence was one that now to me sounds kind of milquetoast, where it's like, oh, that wouldn't be prudent. Like it's kind of being guarded or not decisive. It's actually the opposite. Prudence originally meant the ability to make decisions. And I think that is a virtue. And it's one I work hard on with moderate success. So maybe we can go to the next slide. I don't know if you still do, this was from LECNA as well. So it was adaptability, integration, and resilience. I think we've talked about integration and a little bit of adaptability, because I could go to different roles in my life and still have this common circle as a guide. Since COVID and other challenges, I would like to talk a little bit how resilience has played out at LSS and in my leadership, I know. So maybe we could go to the next slide and talk about resilience. If you were in a staff meeting at LSS, you know, we have the chat function going during, we're online like you guys are. You might see the phrase, be the buffalo. And so my poor staff have to sit through my boring lectures about lessons from nature. I mean, I just make references to them. I don't really lecture on it. But anyway, one of the things that we have found during COVID is, and really there's a lot of crises, you know, there's certainly the murder of George Floyd for us right in our community was a crisis and still is. And has changed how we do everything. Now the staffing crisis is really kind of a third crisis we're having in the last, 20 months, something like that. But you'll see the phrase, be the buffalo. So a buffalo, here's the difference between buffalo and cows. On the Great Plains, you can see a storm, a big thunderstorm coming for many, many, many miles. And so when they see it coming, cows will run away from the storm. And that actually makes, as the storm's coming, it makes the storm last longer. They're in the storm longer. A buffalo will run towards the storm and run through it. And it makes the storm last a less amount of time. So that's the ventral point of be the buffalo. So I think it's important to have attitudes that are really honestly assessing the situation and then confronting them. Don't let them catch up on you. Go towards challenges. And that's the lesson of the buffalo. Maybe we can go to the next slide. So how have bamboo and buffaloes done and helped LSS? We've done well. This is the real who, what, and how of what I have to offer today. You know, in 2021, LSS served 13% more individuals and families than in 2020. And 2020 was the biggest volume of people we've ever helped. So we went even beyond that, despite all the challenges of COVID. And we're a 156-year-old organization. So we are growing really, really fast. And I'm very proud of our teams that do this. Has a lot more to do with them than it does with me. But we've grown services 50% in the last 5 years. We've doubled since 2013. That's pretty amazing. I take great pride in the fact that our teams were there for Minnesotans when we were needed most, and they continue to be. And the reason we grow so fast is we empower people in all 87 counties, the leaders, to recognize needs in their communities and bring them forward and develop new programs and new ideas. We really focus on innovation and tracking results. Does this really change somebody's life and give them what they need to change their own life? Or is it something that we just feel good about? We want to change lives. Person-centered. The minute we quit keeping the person we serve and the families we serve at the center of all we do, it's over. Another thing that will also make things exceedingly difficult is we really focus on trustworthy. Everybody at LSS has a plaque of granite on their, mine's downstairs at the other desk, that says trustworthy in Old English print, very solid, very heavy. It's made out of granite. We ask them to keep that on their desk pointed towards them. So when they're on the phone, it's just a reminder, are you being trustworthy? Because if you lose, you can lose other things. You can lose contracts, and we don't want to. You can lose money. I don't want to do that either. But if you lose trustworthy, it's really game over. So we make it out of granite because as heavy as it is, and if you drop it, it shatters. And so we can't lose being trustworthy to our donors, to the people we contract, and mainly to the people we serve. And that's where the person-centered piece is. Maybe we can go to the last slide, or next slide. It's pretty close to last. Here's my primary takeaway. It's a little story. This is the great John Lee Hooker. So Mr. Lucky. This is the principle of growth. And I think it's one of the really central things for me is always be growing something in yourself and always be growing something in your organization. So here's a little side story. Me and a bunch of friends in college were going to see John Lee Hooker in Chicago. We're coming out of, I don't remember the name of the smaller airport, not O'Hare, the other small one, Midway. Yeah, thank you. We're coming out of Midway, and it's really a 2-lane road, and it's wet, and it's raining, and it's crowded. There's a car right next to me, and there's 2 lanes going this way, and there's a guardrail between us. And suddenly, there was a car that jumped the guardrail and was coming straight for us. There was no time to react. I would have, if I had time to think, probably hit the brakes, and we would have hit the car. There was a car right next to me, and so I couldn't turn over there. I couldn't swerve to the side. Something took over, and I hit the gas towards the car that was flying towards us over the guardrail, and got into a space, really, this was like a 2-second thing, in front of the car next to me. So every fiber of my being was saying, hit the brakes, here comes car. But something took over, and I hit the gas, and that was the thing to do. No matter how bad things get from any crisis you're going through at your organization or elsewhere, I would offer always be hitting the gas on something. Always find something that you're investing and growing in. I get concerned and keep asking myself, am I spending too much time on trying to fix programs that aren't performing well when I probably should be focusing on our strengths? You know, it's a balancing act, but always be hitting the gas on something is my eventual point. And that's what the theory or the principle of growth is. You know, on a personal level, I like the quote by Bob Dylan, he not busy being born is busy dying. So always be growing. And then the second thing for an organization, I've always liked the phrase, the only way to predict the future is to create it. And fortunately for LSS, we've established some pretty nice practices that have allowed us to create the future that we think is best for the people we serve and support in Minnesota. So you don't have to take my approach. I hope you take parts of it and make your own leadership journey an intellectual and emotional development piece. And I find it fascinating. I find LSS fascinating. Lauren talked about being new to the board and learning new things. I've been here 15 years and I'll still have to stop people and say, wait, what? We do what now? We have a truancy program in a town in greater Minnesota I knew nothing about, but hugely impactful. But we empower people to have that freedom to see a community need and make their own decisions. So there's an entrepreneurial spirit to it. I think there's only a couple slides left. Let's go to the next one. Oh, sincere thank you. You know, as I mentioned, a lot of this came from the LECNA program, my ability to reflect on a few things. It was nice. Sometimes you get so busy, you know, sawing that you don't take time to sharpen the saw. And Diana in particular, as my coach, was very helpful at a time where, you know, when Jody left, she took that job, and I had been with LSS for a long time, but there was only about a month to get ready for that job. And Diana was hugely helpful, as were Mary Ann, Tom, and Lauren. So I hope you're having the same kind of wonderful experience with LECNA as I have. And in the future, I hope you continue to utilize it for the benefit of yourself and your organizations. With that, I think all that's left is any questions, comments, or advice for me. Then I don't think we need the slides anymore. Always eager to get advice. So, but if there's any questions or comments, I would welcome them.
I don't have any advice, but I do have a question. This Jeffrey Utzinger, I'm Dean at Concordia University, Texas. Thanks for everything you shared. My question, you mentioned when you were at Coca-Cola that you always found someone or a group of people within the company who had the answers, and I suspect that is a process that you continue in your work today. Can you tell us a little bit about, like, how does that happen? Like, how do you get those types of people to come forward, collect their information, empower them?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. That's nice to meet you, Jeffrey. Well, here's a trite answer, and then I'll get to a real answer. But it's really about listening skills. You know, I've told this story several times, but when I was in grade school, that I remember the teachers telling me, Mr. Tucson, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and you should use them proportionately. And so it is a real humility, I think, to sit and listen. For example, here's a lesson from my current situation. We've always done services in all areas of the Twin Cities, et cetera, but we didn't have a physical presence everywhere. We were more in South Minneapolis than North Minneapolis, and less so in Frogtown and the East Side. All these communities have been underserved and have wonderful organizations there that are way smaller than us doing good work that we want to partner with. So it's really, you know, everything travels at the speed of trust. If you work on trust first, you'll get the answer. If you start asking first, how do you do this, or why don't you do that? Organizations that we want to partner with in those communities, as we develop a physical presence, we've purchased buildings in those neighborhoods now and brought services there. You can't come in like you're on a big white horse or something like that. You have all the answers because you're from a big company or something like that. It's really a matter of a discipline of listening. If you can become a good listener first, I think that's the trick to it. And not be listening like I do sometimes, where it's like, I'm listening thinking, okay, this is what I'm going to say as soon as they're done talking. But really sincere listening. And there's courses on that. There's courses on really empathetic listening to understand rather than to look good with an answer. So I hope something in that was helpful, but that is probably the best skill for a leader to have is listening, more so than knowing technical things how to lead. So
thank you.
Hopefully somewhere in there was an answer. I don't know. Anything else?
I'd like
Yeah.
to jump in and ask a question, and thank you for your presentation. I'm wondering about the metaphor you gave with the bamboo being in a dormant state for a while. Can you give some examples of what that looked like for you when you were working with a person or a team that you saw the potential of excellence in, but they maybe were not performing right away? How did you deal with that in the context of what we as leaders are facing now, performance reviews and accountability to results? How did you hold out hope for them?
Yeah, it's interesting you use the word dormant because maybe that's a little bit different. What the bamboo does is, as if I'm an expert in bamboo, but here's my understanding is for the first 5 years, it's growing roots to sustain that 5th year growth. So it's spreading a huge network of roots and infrastructure under the ground that you just can't see. And then it grows. So it has to do with patience as much as anything. I didn't mean to say it's dormant, like it's sitting there in seed form doing nothing. So it's a little bit different. You know what's hard for me, and you kind of lead towards HR question about seeing it, and let me know if I'm wrong about that, about developing teams and maybe team growth or something that where somebody's not quite performing up to it. You mean that kind of dormant? Yeah. I'm pretty honest about it. When it's not happening, it's not happening. I have the blessing of being in a large company where I can move people to something that I think they're a bigger fit. But if their performance stays at a level or a team's performance stays at a certain level that it's just not changing and those root systems aren't happening, it's unfair to them. It's a waste of their talents. And I have a mission to fulfill. I mean, it's for us, it's about the person served. For you, maybe it's for the experience of the student and their learning, et cetera. If it's not happening, my first priority is for the mission being delivered to the individual in need. I was kind of guessing at what you meant. Do you want to clarify anything, or was any of that helpful?
I think that was helpful. Yeah, accountability to results. And if, if I'm being held towards certain performance goals, and I'm not necessarily seeing those roots deepen, I was just curious about that.
Oh, from the person standpoint. Yeah. If you're getting the watering and feeding daily. And
yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I gotcha. Yeah.
Like how much time to give.
That's
yeah,
really
I think your
interesting.
response is helpful.
Yeah, yeah. So it's kind of the flip of what I was talking about. I worked for one time, I've only had one job that I really disliked. And so that's a pretty good record. I've been very blessed in that regard. But the one I really hated was the situation you're talking about, where there was no expectations and no expectations of what could be achieved. And there was no connection to mission. This wasn't at LSS. And I left. I got out of there because I thought it was a horrible experience. And it was weird because I went back and I was friends with a lot of people and they stayed. And they were always contacting me every few months saying, oh, it's gotten even worse. Can you get me out of here? And for the first few times, I would try to find them a job. I'd say, oh, yeah, you can do this and this and this. And they'd always decide to stay, just kind of an inertia or something. I would just really warn against that. You're too talented and have too bright a future to waste talents on a mission or a boss that's not recognizing and growing you. So that would be my advice to anyone. I got out of there. I thought I was going to die on the vine. Yeah.
Pat, Mike Nevergall, Gustavus Adolphus College. Thank you for your presentation. I apologize in advance because I don't know that I've fully formed this question, but you followed as an internal candidate in Jody's shoes after she had been CEO for a long time, and as far as I know, well liked and respected within the organization. I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to change management, things that if there's one thing that you've chosen to do differently than Jody did during her tenure, and how you navigated that with the people that you've surrounded yourselves with, some of whom also were there during her tenure. People don't like change, and I'm just wondering if you can talk through an example of something that you've done that's different from what she had done, and how you navigated that with your team.
Yeah. One thing that's a little bit different in this situation is Jody's was a CEO that was kind of outward facing, and I was the COO. So I was she would be the first one to say I was already running the organization for about 5 years from an operational standpoint, but she had much more of that vision and community and partnership. So one thing I changed is what I really love doing is going out to our service sites and meeting the people we serve and the people who serve them. And so and that wasn't a Jody thing as much. I like being on the road and going and visiting with people with intellectual disabilities or homeless youth or older adults that are feeling isolated. COVID really cut that out. And so I had to really pivot. And yet I couldn't partner the way Jody did in community, because the same thing, COVID. What I did was I created a position that does that. And because I don't have a COO, so I still run the company in a way that I probably did as a COO. But Alexis Oberdorfer, I created a position called Officer of Community Engagement and Partnership, to do nothing but work with other organizations, help them decide who's going to do what. Maybe we can grow some services together around our objectives or their objectives, et cetera. So I think I grew leadership rather than consolidating leadership. And that was a change for people. Our cabinet has gotten much more diverse racially since Jody left. Not that she was against that. It's just been that opportunity. So I think those are the things that I've changed. And if there's been blowback to it, I haven't heard it, so I don't know. So I don't have the luxury of being that huge change agent because I was already kind of doing it. So sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah. One thing I do differently than her are these more communication with staff. And we do from me to you videos every month or so, just talking to them, encouraging them. That's been really important in a time of high stress and encouraging them to do self-care. So I'd be curious what people, we're just about to do the employee survey. I'll be curious to see what they really think about that. Maybe that'd be a time where I could better answer your question. If I get horrible scores on something, then I'll know that I'm not managing the change very well. But it's really about communication. I just think everything comes down to that developing trust, speed of trust. That's been the overarching thing in my experience. You guys have good questions. And I have long rambly answers, so.
So my name is David Loy. I'm Associate Dean in Christ College at Concordia Irvine. I'm in a different context than you because I work with faculty. So they're not exactly direct reports, right?
Mm-hmm.
And faculty are a little like pastors, where they think that because they have a higher degree, they're qualified to speak on any topic with authority, even if they've never studied it. And I'm both professor and pastor, so I can say that. So you articulated that in every division where you were sent to sort of turn them around or close them, there was somebody who knew the answer. But I'm sure there were tons of people with ideas that were, I'm trying not to say BS, but I'll say it anyway, just sheer BS, completely disconnected from the facts, or so idealistic that you would need a different kind of world. How do you sort those out and kind of work through that tension between the idea that really will work and the ideas that are just shouldn't even be listened to.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know if anybody's in mental health counseling here, but mental health counseling came to mind when you're talking about, well, this will sound bad. Mental health counseling came to mind when you were talking about professors. I don't mean it like that. I mean that it's an industry where I think people went into it picturing one thing, like panel lined, counseling, and being a psychiatrist and everything. And they're highly credentialed, and yet the payment model is horrible. And we lose money on on mental health counseling, but we try to minimize it. When I was CFO, what I did is I listened and I took their ideas and I tried, and it was just never going to work. And so I put them on a pay for productivity. They had to bill 70% of their time. Completely foreign idea that was offensive to how they envision themselves. And when I think, yeah, it's probably unfair and I'm probably offending somebody, but in my dealings with tenured professors, there's an element of that too, where I've known CFOs at schools who are trying to get them to offer different classes, and they're an expert in their field, but their field is shrinking, And so anyway, I did this, and there was a lot of turnover. And sometimes you just have to remind yourself, sometimes there's good turnover too. Your job isn't to keep everybody happy, it's to deliver the mission. We serve the people, who need help. It's not always about everybody's ideas being heard. At some point, you're the one that's going to have to take responsibility for it, either going well or poorly. And if it seems right, try to get buy-in when you can. But actually it worked. So, and there was always somebody who understood, you can find one person who's a supporter and has a bigger lens. I would always go towards the mission. See if you can have a common understanding and vibrancy around the mission and explain it that this is going to help change more lives. I have found that our mission settles all disputes. So, and in the Old West, this is probably a bad thing to say now with gun violence and everything, but in the Old West saloons, there was often a sign that said, a Smith & Wesson beats 4 aces every time. Well, we try to make it so that the mission beats all other interests, including self-interest. So if you can appeal to have them be heard, but it doesn't mean that they're going to decide all the time. You have to do what you have to do. So. That was another good question. Thank you for that.
I have a comment and then a question as well too. First of all, the comment is how much I am appreciating this LECNA connection, because Catherine Teedy, who's not with us today, is one of our LECNA fellows and my partner, and she connected me with Alexis to help me with my the project. So I just had breakfast with her right before Christmas, and so this connection, these ties are really helpful, and I really appreciate that. And she was a fantastic hire. She's great.
Yeah.
My question is to you as somebody who's moved to different organizations. One of the things that I find uncomfortable is when new folks will come in and talk about us right away, but I also find it uncomfortable when they don't talk about us right away. What's that timeline for you when you go to a new organization? And I know you've been there 15 years, so it's been a while, but when you'd go from Coke to United Way, LSS or other organizations, how long does it take you to talk about being part of the organization in the way that you describe yourself as being part of the us or part of the we?
Yeah, that's interesting. So you think that people coming in on day one and saying us is inappropriate to them, or?
I'm not sure inappropriate is strong enough, because it also bothers me when they don't. It's just, it's weird. It's like if it comes too quickly, it feels uncomfortable, because they don't know us yet. But if it takes too long, that's also uncomfortable. So I don't have what I'm looking for. I just know when it feels wrong.
Yeah. I would like them to start saying us on day one. I will talk sometimes too much about a previous organization. And if it's in the context of, hey, we used to do this and this seems right to me, or you guys should start doing it, I find that troublesome. If people think they, we're going to become their previous organization that they left, I just want to learn from them and get better. But if it's continually like that, this is a little bit off the topic, but my family's lived in the same town for a long time, and there's kind of an old town within the town, and then it's grown a lot. And I had somebody tell me how much they didn't feel welcomed in our town because all our history was always about the old families and stuff like that. And that has really, I had never thought of that. I had thought, it's a great town and it's growing and all this stuff. And we didn't make people feel welcome. So I get excited if somebody will talk about us on day one. But it's more of a challenge for me if you're coming in and when to quit talking about the previous company, Yeah.
Thank you. That's helpful. I appreciate that. I will think differently about that as new folks come in. I appreciate that.
Yeah. You know what helped me? And I don't know if it's right or wrong, my answer there, but here's what happened with me. So I leave for-profit and I go to an organization, and one day the CEO of that organization says, we work for the board. And that's not why I left. I mean, I was doing pretty good in for-profit. I would have, they thought I was nuts. You're going to where? Why would you do that? At Coke. So anyway, but this organization, he said, we worked for the board of directors. And I thought, that's not why I left to work for a board of directors. I had that at the last place. And then I went to another organization. I loved that job too. It was a good job. And one day their CEO said, we work for our biggest donors. If they're happy, it means we're doing a good job. And I get the logic of that, but again, I thought, that isn't why I did what I did. And so I came to LSS and I was talking to Mark Peterson, was at that time the CEO, so before Jody. And in one of the first meetings, I said, who do you think we work for? Who does LSS work for? And he thought I was nuts. I'm surprised he kept me on. It was such a stupid question to him. He said, we work for the people we serve and support. And I thought, that's it. That's why I made this change. It's about the person. And that has proven to be true at LSS every day since. And so that's why it was a good fit for me. That part was important. So that helped me get over the us and them. I thought, this is the right mission for me. Well, I'm right before lunch, so I bet people are probably watching their clocks. But
Pat, thanks. Thank you so much. We talk about it throughout this year that leadership begins with the who. That our first task as to leaders is to understand ourselves and to put ourselves together to think through who we are, why it is we're called to the task of leadership, what are the values, what's the purpose and calling, all of that's going to be our compass and our guide. And Pat is just so thoughtful about those issues. I hope you heard that in his presentation. I just think Pat is a model for us and all of us in so many ways, and he's such a remarkably thoughtful individual. And I can tell you, he lives this out. He lives this out. We just did the annual evaluation, and I'm not going to reveal any deep secrets here that I shouldn't, but board and staff and people served and everything. Outstanding evaluations and positive evaluation of Pat's leadership. The most positive of all was from the staff. The people who know him best and who work with him on a day-to-day basis. And as you were talking about, magnanimity and humility, and the belief that there's excellence, there's a buried in each employee, may be buried, may not be buried at all, but it's there. And in the people we serve. And wow, that's powerful stuff. So Pat, we're in your debt for today. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. I hope everybody has a great new year. Stay safe. Blessings to you all. Take
Thank
care.
you. We'll see you. We'll be
Yeah.
back at 1 o'clock Central. Okay, bye-bye. Highlights of
Sorry.
one of the highlights of recent cohorts has been experience has been the time with Steve Balls from Augustana College on the subject of shared governance. As you all know, the closer you get to the top of the organization, the more you run into the board, which is one important dimension of shared governance, along with the administration and of course the faculty. Steve Balls is one of our remarkable Lutheran College presidents. He's in his victory lap this year at Augustana, will conclude with 18 years, right, Steve?
19 years.
19 years. I underestimated. Yeah, okay. In every respect, Augustana is a different, stronger, and I think you could argue even better college than it was 19 years ago. Steve has had a remarkable run, and his expertise and knowledge in shared governance has become known across the country, as he has authored books and articles for the Association of Governing Boards, and made numerous appearances at conference and special events and on campuses to discuss the remarkable way in which we have developed the governance structure for our colleges and universities. It's a pleasure, Steve, to welcome you back again this year. And Steve will spend the next hour with us on the subject of shared governance. You will enjoy it, I predict. So Steve, it's all yours.
Well, thank you very much, Lauren. Thank you for that kind and generous introduction. And thank you, Tom, also for inviting me. To our LECNA fellows, congratulations on being selected for this program. And thank you. This has been an important program in Lutheran higher education. It has been a program that has prepared many leaders, advanced many individuals in their thinking about the special niche of our institutions, an important niche in higher education. I'll share my screen here with you, and would like to just make a couple of introductory comments with respect to shared governance, how I became interested in shared governance. Prior to coming to Augustana College, I had the privilege of serving as a law school professor at the University of Montana, and then dean and professor at Capital University. I taught in the area of governance, and I've always been interested in governance of organizations. But in my 18 years of teaching corporate law, nonprofit organizations law, interestingly, rarely did the word shared governance ever cross my lips. Shared governance is a convention in higher education. By and large, it is not written into the law. The law provides for nonprofit organizations that the board manages the nonprofit organization, and that's about it. Yet we have developed over the years this wonderful convention of shared governance, going back to the roots of higher education institutions in Europe. But it has been controversial since the day that it was first talked about in Europe, and remains controversial today. Not so much because people don't know whether shared governance is a good thing or a bad thing. It's just that we have a hard time defining what shared governance is and what it looks like. I became interested in shared governance when I came to Augustana College, based on the charge that I was given as the new president of Augustana and the reaction of the faculty to that charge. And that charge was to shake things up a little bit. Augustana had had a wonderful 28-year president before me. We have long presidents at Augustana College. And my charge was to rapidly engage in strategic planning and move the institution forward rapidly from some problems. This was not embraced by the faculty. When I indicated to the faculty we were going to move very quickly, and I stumbled over shared governance. And out of good intent to advance the position of the board, and my provost stumbled over shared governance, and we very nearly got a vote of no confidence. I determined that I needed to learn about shared governance. There were not a lot of resources on shared governance beyond what the AAUP had to say. When I consulted with AGB about it and asked for help with AGB, they suggested that I write the book about what I had learned by the School of Hard Knocks. So shared governance is something that I think is becoming more challenging as time goes on in higher education, because boards are wanting to move ahead much more quickly, given the challenges that higher education faces, and faculty trained to ask the difficult questions and sometimes be contrarians, certainly is asking the more difficult questions. We're seeing COVID put a lot of stress on shared governance. Those institutions where shared governance is working well has been able to move through COVID with a sense of one direction. Those institutions where shared governance is challenged have found in some cases a splintering. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the book I wrote and the articles I wrote about shared governance to give you a little idea with respect to shared governance, of philosophies, and how we as existing and emerging leaders can advance shared governance. I would say, please feel free to interrupt me with questions, and we'll leave plenty of room for questions at the end. I'll talk a little bit about how we've made shared governance as effective as it can be at Augustana, but I'll caution you that one size does not fit all for shared governance and how it works. So the suggestions that I make, some of them work quite well here, may not work as well at your institution, but hopefully the spirit of the suggestions can aid you. Finally, we often see, before I get into the details, higher education viewing shared governance as something of a sword. And often when faculty or others feel things are not going well, they wield the sword of shared governance. The board doesn't appreciate shared governance. The president doesn't appreciate a shared governance, and it becomes a point of conflict. My thesis is that we want to avoid that from happening by developing a common understanding of what shared governance is and what it isn't. Often when shared governance is used as a sword, it is because different parties have different definitions of shared governance. Finally, I will say that effective shared governance is messy business. It is hard to share governance in a sense because of the passions of everyone involved. The board is passionate about wanting to bring its expertise to the institution and passionate about fixing problems yesterday. And sometimes that stumbles with respect to shared governance. Faculty are passionate about what happens in the classroom and what happens today in the classroom. Sometimes it interferes with more strategic long-range planning. Sometimes administrators are caught in the middle. Let me talk a little bit about what I learned when I was writing the book. One of the wonderful things, and I would advise it to members of the LECNA Fellows, is to, if you have the privilege of becoming a college president, negotiate for a sabbatical. I received a sabbatical after 7 years as a college president. Now it was a summer sabbatical, and my summer sabbatical project was to write a book. One of the things that I wanted to do in this sabbatical was to get away from the college where I could not be found. Where can you get away these days and not have access to internet and so on? My wife and I spent the summer sabbatical in the Arctic. And let me tell you about some lessons I learned from traveling in the Arctic about shared governance. The first one is when in quicksand, keep on moving. I was doing some rafting down a river and along a lake in the Arctic. And did you know there's quicksand in the Arctic? It's not the quicksand like you see in the movies where you sink up to your neck, but like in this picture, you sink to your thighs if it is bad in glacial silt, and it is tough to get out. And I sunk in the quicksand, and the 18-year-old guide said to me, "Steve, you violated the number 1 rule. When you are in quicksand and you start to sink, keep on moving." I would suggest to you that in higher education, we are in a bit of quicksand now with new competitors, with cost pressures, with wondering what the new normal is. We must move faster than ever. And I would submit to you that shared governance properly implemented does not slow us down, but can create the consensus and alignment to move quickly. The other thing that I saw, and I took this picture, in higher education, we are too focused on the past, too focused on annoyances, and we lose sight of the big threats. This is not a good sight, this grizzly bear, to see a brown bear when you're rounding the corner on a hike. And likewise, we're rounding the corner in higher education to a new normal of higher education, and too much focus on the grievances of the past. The president did this, the board did that, this faculty member did that, is not going to propel us forward. Shared governance can be a vehicle to move us into the future. Finally, I'd like to show you, as I tee up my discussion of shared governance, a picture that was taken at Augustana College some years ago, which helps me to, in a way, understand some aspects of shared governance a bit more. What do you see in that picture? This picture was taken in the TV room at Augustana College in 1995. Can you believe that we used to have TV rooms? Look at the expression on the faces of the African-American students at Augustana, sheer glee. Look at the expressions on the faces of the white students, concern. What could this be a picture of? Well, some of you guessed it. Some of you remember it. This was the announcement of the verdict in the O.J. Simpson trial. I think that's is helpful in helping me understand shared governance. Why are there different reactions by different groups of students? It's based on our experience. And if you understand that our reactions and our approach are based on our experiences, and our experiences are different, you start to understand shared governance a little bit. African-American students in this case were very tuned in to police misconduct, fabrication of evidence, whereas the majority of students were not as tuned in. Faculty members are tuned in to what happens in the classroom and how to make great teaching today. Administrators are tuned in to the intermediate run, how to get through the next strategic plan. Trustees are tuned in to the long run. We all bring different experiences, view the college differently. As such, shared governance, when best constituted, is a system of helping align directions of the college, even though in a sense we are akin to a team of rivals. You remember the Doris Kearns Goodwin book, which was the basis of the movie Lincoln. Lincoln's cabinet was made up of very different individuals with very different viewpoints. They didn't like each other, some of them, yet they piloted this country through the Civil War. I would submit to you that shared governance can take very different groups and build a very, very strong institution. Now, Doris Kearns Goodwin talked about a team of rivals. I'd rather talk about a team of partners. How can, if we have effective shared governance, what does that mean for the institution? Well, if we have effective shared governance, it leads to consequential boards. It leads to boards that are focusing on the big generative fiduciary issues associated with the college instead of diving down into what color is the carpet in the new building, or what should we teach within this major. If the college is operating well, boards then focus on their oversight duties. Likewise, if shared governance is working well, we empower faculty governance. What's the difference between shared governance and faculty governance? Shared governance is of the institution and the direction of the institution. Faculty governance is as defined by the AAUP, that faculty have primary responsibility for tenure and promotion, for what happens in the classroom, how they organize themselves. It is important for our colleges to have a faculty that is not defeated, a faculty that is engaged in the future of the college. When shared governance is working and people are looking forward, indeed, we empower faculty governance. That improves what happens in the classroom. When shared governance works well, it empowers you as administrative leaders. When we are in fact rowing in the same direction, it empowers us all. And when shared governance works, it creates alignment. For example, with the COVID crisis, many colleges and universities worked on the COVID response with broad-based task forces using principles of shared governance. That worked. Others were viewed as the answers were decreed from the top. Faculty became suspicious. That did not work. Effective shared governance empowers all of us to do our jobs. Let's touch on some of the barriers to shared governance. Then we'll talk about the definitions of shared governance and best practices. Shared governance doesn't always come natural. By that, I mean board members want to get it done and get it done yesterday. When I became a new president at Augustana College, I wanted to get that strategic plan done within months. Felt that I saw the path forward when I really didn't, because I had not consulted. And faculty are, of course, are concerned about what is the quality of the education in the classroom today. What are the barriers then to effective shared governance? Attitudinal barriers, we as leaders can remove some of those. Structural barriers, we as leaders can remove some of those. And behavioral barriers, we as leaders can not necessarily remove those, but help mitigate the negative effects. What are the attitudinal barriers to shared governance? Well, there are largely myths about each other that corrode respect. And I've been on the board of 2 higher education institutions. I've been a faculty member at 2 places and administrators. And man, is it easy in those classifications to have myths about trustees, myths about faculty. What do we think about trustees? They're suits that practice drive-by management. You can read through these myths. The one that I often hear is those trustees are bean counters. I'll tell you, I'm an accountant in my first life, a CPA. And there was a member of our English faculty that came in and said to me, "Steve, you are a bean counter." And I went down to the provost's office and I said, "I think he likes me. I'm an accountant, you know, counting beans is good." And he quickly, the provost said, "No, he doesn't like you. That's a negative term." But we have these myths about each other. The truth is that as leaders that we can help our community to understand that trustees in many ways are like faculty. They want a better institution. They're entrepreneurial like a faculty. Let's get to know each other so we can smash these myths that stop communication. Here are the myths about administration. And you've heard those myths about at your school. It's easier to categorize others sometimes than get to know others. The one I like is number 5. The same faculty member, incidentally, that told me I was a bean counter, came in a year later and gave me a high compliment. That is that I was a necessary evil. So I was making progress. And indeed, these are the myths about administration. And we kind of need to show compassion, that we care about the quality of education, not just the business aspect, that we have some independence from the board, and that we are, in fact, acting in good faith to try to balance the interest of all constituencies. This is what I hear from board members about faculty. Kittens would be easier to manage. They can't take yes for an answer. They're professional contrarians. I say to that, so what? You want a faculty that are a bunch of kittens? Do you want a faculty that don't use their critical thinking skills? Do you want a faculty that is compliant and does not help, in fact, enhance the institution? We as leaders can acknowledge these myths, and we as leaders can help board members understand faculty, faculty understand board members, and get past the place where we categorize others because of their status, but instead really get to know others and recognize that we can be a team of partners. There are some structural barriers to effective shared governance. One is excessive decentralization. This is often a problem with how faculty organize themselves. By this, I mean that you don't have an effective faculty senate, you don't have an effective faculty council, that the faculty is almost in anarchy. There is no organization. You can see this at larger institutions, that you have so much bureaucracy that it is impossible to bring parties to the table. And it's something that you want to promote. That is to share governance, effective faculty governance, an effective faculty senate or faculty council or faculty as a whole is a key element. Because if you have to negotiate each idea with each department or each individual, it just doesn't work. Likewise, sometimes faculty are prone to grumblers of vetoes. That is, I often hear, well, if you do this, the faculty will grumble. They will be unhappy. Well, I was a faculty member for 18 years, and grumbling was the way we told each other that we loved each other. So administrators can't get too hung up on this grumblers of veto. Administrators need to build the case that decisions need to be made, that people will disagree with those decisions, but we will make those decisions collaboratively and respect even those who disagree. And then often it's fun to have a shared governance and shared decision-making, no implementation metric, and all of our efforts go to naught. Behavioral barriers, and I'd like to pause here for a minute because we see this in higher education. We see a lot of conflict avoidance in higher education. Do you see that at your institution? We'd rather kick the can down the road than make a decision. Sometimes we see this within faculty senates. Sometimes we see this within boards. Sometimes we see this within certainly administrations. And part of our job as administrative leaders is to help our community understand that even with shared governance, conflict is okay. We're all passionate about what we do. None of us are order takers. We're often going to debate out, and that debate might be fairly rigorous and at times sharp. We'll try to use as much collegiality as we can, but let us address those issues. And of course, the job of an administrator often in an institution is to say that a decision needs to be made by this date. There is the process by which we will make it. It will be a process that will have an ending, and it will be a process that has some conflict, and recognize that conflict is okay. Lack of respect. Do you see that sometimes at your institution? A few faculty members just don't respect the administration, and the administration can't do anything right. And it may be the same way the other way around. We as administrators need to be careful there with respect to losing respect for the faculty. When we don't have respect for the faculty, it's time to stop being an administrator. If I would have written off every faculty member that has had a word that about me that has crossed me a little bit, I'd have no friends on the faculty. We need to respect even those who disagree with us, and we need to respect those who disagree with us, even though that disagreement may be a little nasty. Impatience, certainly shared governance does take some time to work. And then a final behavioral barrier is divide and conquer attitude. And I would urge you, as we see this among college presidents, you see it among provosts, faculty leaders, what do I mean? It is the president that tells the board, look, these faculty members are like herding cats. They can't take yes for an answer. The president tells the board that. At the same time, the president tells the faculty, you know, these board members are here only 3 times a year. It's drive-by management. They're a bunch of business people. I'll protect you from them. That's the divide and conquer attitude, telling the faculty that you'll protect them from the board, telling the board that you'll knock some sense into the faculty. That is a cheap management style. You see it sometimes among provosts. I'll protect you against the president, and then telling the president, I'll protect you against the faculty. That doesn't work in higher education because we're bright. It works for about 3 months and you lose all credibility. As a leader for shared governance to work, don't pit parties against themselves. It is against each other. It's a short-term gain and not a long-term gain. Well, let's talk about the 4 views of shared governance. And that is that shared governance is sometimes viewed as equal rights to make decisions, sometimes viewed as mere consultation, sometimes viewed as rules of engagement. And I will argue it should be shared responsibility. Let's go over each of these a bit. This is why we have the problem. Different constituencies view shared governance differently. Equal rights to governance. Well, what about that? Is shared governance equal rights is effective shared governance equal rights to governance? That is, that we don't make a decision until everyone agrees. Anything wrong with that? Any ideas there?
I think given what you've just said about the barriers, certainly waiting for everyone to agree or even kind of a majority would definitely slow the process and maybe even paralyze it.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Monica. That's exactly right. For those that view shared governance as equal rights to governance, for example, if we're gonna, the question is, where do we put a building? We need to wait until everyone agrees. Decisions don't get made. Faculty really don't want everyone to have equal rights to governance. Faculty don't want the board to have equal rights to what is taught in class. This is inconsistent with state law. We have different responsibilities. The board has an oversight responsibility. The administration has a strategic planning responsibility. So shared governance as equal rights to governance, well, attractive in some ways is unworkable. Some faculty members still have this view though. And then if you're held to a standard as an administrator that no decisions are made until every constituency agrees, you are bound to disappoint. That is why it is important for one to lead a discussion of what shared governance means within an institution. A second view is the obligation to consult. And that is that we have our own zones of responsibility, but we should consult with each other before making a decision. Well, that sounds okay at a first blush. What's wrong with that? Well, I think those of you that have had contact with higher education boards know what's wrong with that. Boards are dealing with a tough issue and debating it out and come to a resolution of that issue. And then someone on the board says, well, have we consulted with the faculty? Oh, no, we haven't. President, why don't you consult with them? Well, the decision's already made, but we consult with the faculty anyway. The problems with the obligation to consult is consultation is often not meaningful. It is not timely. It is not an iterative process. And often when we consult with faculty and others, we don't give them the background to provide us with meaningful help on the consultation. Consulting with others about our decisions as administrators is a necessary part of shared governance, but it's not a sufficient part. That's not the sum and substance of shared governance. A third definition, a popular definition, is a set of rules of engagement when we disagree with each other. And the AAUP Statement of Governance of Colleges and Universities, drafted in 1966, adopted by the AAUP, and commended for study by the AGB and ACE, takes this approach. It takes the approach of a shared governance being a set of rules of how we engage with a faculty. That document has made its way, I venture to bet, into your faculty handbooks, most of you. How do we do tenure and promotion? How do the faculty organize itself? So it is a serious document. When I talk to boards about shared governance, I often hear from board members, we're not going to tell the AAUP what to do. We're not going to let the AAUP tell us what to do. And then faculty members sometimes use it as a sword. You know, you need to do this, administration. You need to engage the faculty more deeply. Concerning the AAUP statement, I tell boards, read it. I tell faculty members to read it. We have, all of us, our conceptions of what it says. But if you read it, it boils down to this. Faculty members have primary responsibility for the classroom, how they organize themselves, tenure and promotion, and matters of termination of faculty members. I would say that's not a radical concept. The AAUP states that the president and the administration, they are the planners in chief, recognizing that administrations lead the college and the direction of the college. Now, it does say for a planner in chief to be effective, that planner in chief, the president or provost, must have the confidence of the faculty and board, and that the board has the general oversight of the institution to ensure that the dollars invested in the institution lead to good outcomes. The AAUP statement is not a radical statement and is a statement that we ought to be familiar with and understand as part of shared governance, but it is not all of shared governance. The AAUP statement focuses on engagement and boundaries and what to do when those boundaries blur or are crossed. The AAUP statement talks less about aligning the board, faculty, and administration to, in fact, create a path for the college or university. I apologize, you know, I am a liberal arts college president, and I often go back to poetry, but Frost actually has something to say here. My son went to school up in Middlebury, Vermont, where Frost received a lot of his inspiration for his poetry, and he writes about his apple trees. My apple trees will never get across and eat the cones under his pines, I tell him. I imagine two farmers here standing in their overalls looking over the stone fence, one with apple trees and the other with a forest, but debating that stone fence. He says, good fences make good neighbors. Why do they make good neighbors? Isn't it where there are cows, but there are no cows here? An apple orchard and a pine orchard. And sometimes I think that when I hear good fences make good neighbors in higher education, maybe, but aren't we all focused on the students and focused on the same thing? And can't shared governance be something more than simply rules of engagement? So we argue at Augustana that shared governance should be a fourth definition, a system of open communication that takes into account the transparency, that aligns priorities. Priorities are important, so it's a forward-looking statement, and creates a culture of trust and a culture of shared responsibility and accountability for exceptional outcomes. That is the object of shared governance that I argue for, and I'd like to unpack that just a little bit for you. But do you see that it takes into account elements of the earlier definitions of shared governance, which is nice because at many institutions, we can develop a consensus for this definition. Let us unpack it. How do we use shared governance to align priorities? Nurture a culture of transparency. That is three-way transparency, not only transparency from the administration to the faculty, but transparency from the faculty to the administration and board. That is, are the students picking up the learning outcomes that we identified? Are there enough resources for us to advance those student learning outcomes? Nurture a culture of transparency because we're all working for the students. Commit to joint consideration of difficult issues. Now, a difficult issue is not what we're teaching in Accounting 101. A difficult issue at our institutions may be, how do we address COVID? How do we embrace diversity, equity, and inclusion? How do we prepare for competition by nonprofits and other organizations? But a commitment to work together to consider the difficult issues. It doesn't mean that we will wait for unanimous agreement. Rather, it means we will consult and work together. Agreed on a set of shared metrics for success. How does this advance the student learning outcomes? How does this advance the financial goals of the institution? So when we have stress to the system, we know the system, and then craft checks and balances to maintain a mission focus. And that's the AAUP. I'm an advocate of the AAUP Statement of Governance of Colleges and Universities for the reasons that I've recommended. It realizes the central role of the administration in strategic planning. Faculty are bought into it. If we honor the AAUP standards, perhaps modified as they are found in our faculty handbooks, if we're all committed to transparency, if we're all committed to working on difficult issues together, and we can agree on the metrics, there is a good chance of aligning priorities. The AGB has done some work here on how shared governance operates and has surveyed its member institutions and has asked, how is shared governance operating at your institution? Now, the AGB, I would say, I think made one mistake here, and I blame myself a bit because I was involved in the preparation of this survey. I wish to heck that we would have added a third category, faculty, and asked faculty how they perceive that it works. But you see that the predominant view is that almost split fairly equally, that shared governance is mere consultation or only the AAUP rules, and about 26% of presidents and 36% of trustees believe that it is effectively lining priorities. Now, here is a different slide. How should a shared governance work in the same survey by the Association of Governing Boards? And you see that most agree that shared governance ought to work to align a priority. So you see there's a significant gap there. One thing that I like to do when I talk to institutions is to ask institutions these questions: trustees, presidents, and faculty. That is, how does shared governance work at your institution? And then how do you think it should work after you go through the definitions? And you see significant gaps. And that significant gaps is certainly fodder for interesting discussions. So if in fact the faculty think that shared governance is working as rules of engagement, but would like to think that it ought to align priorities, what a great discussion that can be. The AGB, interesting, also surveyed presidents on opportunities for shared governance. This is at independent institutions, and where might we have the most effective discussions that would harness the power of shared governance? Part of the problem we have at many institutions is that there is not a culture of trust of shared governance, culture of trust across the various constituencies. And if we can have some of these discussions, certainly within the institution, it creates successes and allows us to propel shared governance effectively. At Augustana, we amended our mission statement to conform to rooted and open from the ELCA. That was a community-wide discussion, a discussion that changed our mission statement but that created the capacity to align priorities between the board, administration, and faculty. New markets and academic innovation. We've had less discussion of that here, but again, it is an outstanding area. Student learning outcomes. Why not engage the board in that for the faculty to see that the board, is concerned about the students and learning outcomes. And usually board members are fairly deferential to faculty, not always. Campus climate, diversity, equity, and inclusion. For those of you that have done climate surveys, if you're like Augustana, you're not hitting a home run on those climate surveys. We may be hitting, I hope we're getting a double here at Augustana, but there is a difference certainly between where institutions are and where they want to be. What better thing to discuss as a community? Cost, affordability, impact, and then access. So presidents have identified these as key areas where we can have effective conversations about shared governance. I would say bound up in all of this is certainly strategic planning. Let's run through some 6 best practices, and then let's open it up to a Q&A. 6 simple best practices for shared governance. Number 1, understand what shared governance is and what it isn't. Have discussions at the institution about shared governance. For institutions I work with, I like to have that discussion of what are the 4 definitions? Which of the 4 definitions do you think characterizes this institution, and where should we be? It creates a nice gap analysis, and it creates a way to discuss what shared governance is and what shared governance isn't. We need to engage certainly faculty leadership in this discussion, not simply the administration, not simply the board. And we're going to find probably that there are differences in views of shared governance. In talking about those differences, we strengthen shared governance. I think it's a best practice to periodically assess the state of shared governance and develop an action plan to improve it. By that, I mean that shared governance doesn't automatically happen. It is a good once every 5 years, perhaps more often, to assess the state of shared governance. There are surveys available to do that. For those of you who are members of the AGB, AGB has a survey that I have prepared. If you're not a member, send me an email, even if you are a member of the survey. And it's a survey that is given to board members, administrators, and faculty members, and it deals with the elements of shared governance, including is sufficient information shared? Do we trust each other? What is the level of trust? I will tell you, every time I hear of an institution using this survey, the board thinks shared governance is going swimmingly. The faculty think it's not going so well, and the administration is in between. When you have that data, it makes a fine way to start a discussion on improving it. So when shared governance melded down at Augustana, we established a shared governance task force. The faculty elected their own members. The board elected their own members to talk about improving it. I asked them to come up with 2 things that we could do immediately and a couple of things that we could do in the longer run. Their immediate things that they wanted to do is to change. We had some administrators that chaired faculty committees. We agreed not to do that. They wanted to have more access to the board, meet with board members when they were there, easy to do. And they wanted to amend the faculty handbook to conform with current practice. Easy to say, a 5-year period to do. But again, it helps with shared governance. One of the barriers to shared governance is a faculty handbook that does not conform to current practice, and then using that faculty handbook as a sword. The third best practice is ensure the strength of faculty governance, board oversight, and administrative engagement. One cannot have strong shared governance without faculty governance, faculty governance of the academic program. How many of you at your institution have seen your institution kind of grind up faculty leaders? You know, it's a tough job to be chair of the faculty senate as you're trying to move the institution forward. I think it's incumbent upon us as administrators to continue to praise the faculty, praise faculty governance, and praise those who lead in faculty governance, because it is a thankless job. To the extent that we can influence it, encouraging the board to have eyes in, hands out, certainly helps with shared governance, meaning they have that fiduciary duty. And then for us to be engaged in the issues of the day and developing policies in a timely way. Fourth best practice, frequent communication with three-way transparency. I will say about transparency that you can give too much or too little information. If you want the faculty to weigh in on an issue, what should we be doing about COVID? What should we be doing to, in fact, respond to a climate a survey where we see that different categories of students have different views of sense of belonging? We need to educate the parties as to what is available and what the alternative responses are. It's one thing to ask for their opinion. When I was a law school dean, I remember a faculty member wanted to be involved in budgeting, and he wanted to see the budget. So I gave him the budget printouts. Those printouts were 2 feet high. It was like drinking from a fire hose. I disrespected that faculty member. He wanted to be involved. I gave that faculty member more information than one could possibly digest. Transparency is about early questions or early transparency. Be transparent often, have it as an iterative process, but the key to making transparency work is to educate your audience. Here are the alternatives with respect to how we might handle COVID. Here's what public health guidelines are. Here is the latitude that we have and that we don't have. Best practice in shared governance is to know who has what authority and to respect checks and balances. We have a shared governance grid here, talks about how decisions are made. So the faculty know up front on the budget that it is the board that adopts the budget. It is the administration that recommends the budget, but the faculty budget committee is advisory. People want to know up front, is it advisory? Do we make the decision? The clearer we can be. And then the sixth best practice, develop deliberate ways to increase social capital between administrators and trustees. We are more alike than we are different. I would tell you that at Augustana College, we have 40 board members and 40 administrators every other year at a retreat, and they get to know each other. And they have a beer in the bar together, faculty and administrators. And it is a grand thing. We pick a topic such as diversity, equity, and inclusion that they can sink their teeth into. Before I open it up to Q&A, I'd like to come back to a point that I forgot, and that is number 2. Does it include all voices? So when we're consulting with board members and faculty members, are we consulting with only the people that have been around for a long time? Or are we drawing out new members of our community? Do we consult with men more than women? Are there differences with respect to demographic groups? Well, there, my friends, you have it. My views on shared governance and best practices on shared governance. I should say that there are other issues that are beyond our time today. What's the role of students in shared governance? That should be discussed. What is the role of staff and mid-level administrators? They often felt frozen out. You know, when everyone is stressed out and working at the max with respect to shared governance, how do we make it easy? Millennial employees, for many of our millennial employees, we say to them, we want you to participate in shared governance. There will be a committee that meets from 3 to 5 on Friday to talk about these issues. They need another committee like they need a hole in the head. Millennials want to get things done. Can you think of ways to bring people in and out? And then are we sure that shared governance is advancing diverse viewpoints. And let me say that we've had to struggle with that a bit at Augustana College. Those that raise their hand to participate in shared governance are not reflective of the demographics of the institution, and we as leaders need to help them along. With that, friends, what questions do you have? Anything surprise you? Do you disagree with anything?
I have a question about a term that you used. You talked about three-way transparency or three-way communication. Can you just tell us what you mean by that?
Yes, often when we, thank you, Dr. Monica, often when we talk about transparency within shared governance, is it the board and the administration being transparent with the faculty? And in fact, the faculty need to be transparent with the board. So the AGB talks about the role of the board in oversight of the academic program, and talks about the importance of faculty tracking where there are problems in student learning outcomes, where there are problems and sense of belonging in the classroom. So faculty members need to speak up too. Let us assume that there are problems in achieving student learning outcomes. The board then is charged to ask why there are those problems. Do we not have systems to track them? Are the student learning outcomes too ambitious for our budget? Do we need to invest more money in it? So the faculty need to view not only themselves as receiving information, but in fact, bucking information to the administration and board. Typically, they buck information to the board through the administration. But very frankly, as a president, I like this notion of 40 faculty members and 40 board members, and having board members and faculty members develop these lines of communication. Now, I caution the board, look, it's not an individual faculty member that speaks for the faculty. It is the elected faculty, and there's a process here. But feel free to talk with the faculty about what you want. Just don't kind of make promises and base decisions on it. Good question.
Thank you.
Got time for a couple more.
Thanks very much for the presentation. I'm Ben Haupt. I'm at Concordia Seminary in St. Louis, serving as the Associate Provost and working especially on enrollment. Our speaker before lunch talked a little bit about storms that leaders see coming off in the distance. And he encouraged us to be like buffaloes who charge into the storm rather than like cows that run away from the storm. I'm interested in when a leader sees a storm on the horizon, how does shared governance help in that situation? So is enrollment declines, or with the enrollment cliff coming, how can administrators help to help everyone see the storm coming, and what does that look like in shared governance?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. You know, when I charge into the storm, I don't want to charge into the storm myself. I want to have the board with me, and I want to have the faculty with me. So many presidents that are subject to votes of no confidence are charging into the storm without the constituencies. I do believe, and I think it's a very good question, that we as administrators, most of us come from faculty positions. Let's not forget our role as educators. That doesn't stop when we're administrators. So to educate the community about the demographic cliff, we've spent a lot of time on it. You can ask any faculty member or administrator here, and they can tell you when it is and approximately what percentage decline in our area in terms of high school graduates. So part of our job is to be truth tellers, educators. This is coming up. We don't want to be making decisions about responding to the demographic cliff when it gets here. There's precious little time to prepare. You know, if I take a heavy hand in anything, Ben, it's in setting timetables. We need to decide what to do by this date. So, for example, at Augustana, Augustana has adopted a Fit for the Future plan to prepare us for the demographic cliff. I set the timeline in terms of when that report needed to be made, but it was a collaborative group. Identifying the problem, kind of setting timelines, and then hopefully preparing to generate the resources. But when you charge into that storm, you don't want to be alone. And when you charge into that storm, you want to charge in that storm, to mix metaphors a little bit, on your own playing field. You want to play on your playing field, and you want to not play by the rules of somebody else, by the rules of the faculty senate as they establish them, once you're in the storm, but rather in these shared rules. Does that help?
Yeah, very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Other questions?
My name is Mike Frechette. I'm the Dean of Enrollment and Financial Aid at Pacific Lutheran University in Tacoma, Washington. Question for you about what you described as excessive decentralization, and pairing that with the term you've used throughout your presentation, faculty senate. So at PLU, we have a faculty assembly, not a faculty senate, where all faculty members, gather once a month, and shared decision-making happens across the entire faculty. So our faculty have wrestled with whether or not that's an appropriate model now moving forward. And I'm just curious if you have an opinion about faculty senate versus faculty assemblies.
Yeah, I do have an opinion on that. And of course, either can work. When I came to Augustana, we had a faculty senate, but 2/3 of the faculty were on the faculty senate. And as part of our shared governance exercise, the faculty and the dean pushed a bit, led to either a faculty council or a smaller faculty senate, a true faculty senate. So our faculty senate had the hallmarks of a faculty assembly. It can work, but at an institution the size of PLU or an institution the size of Augustana, the faculty owe it to themselves to ask, is this the way that we're going to head into the storm, or do we have the confidence to delegate? This was a lengthy discussion at Augustana, but the faculty determined that they could have more of a voice with the administration if it was an elected council. And indeed they have. And it's been great for the administration, right? Because when there is a problem, you know who to go to. The problem with our faculty senate that met every other month is that you just, one report after the other, and there were no deep discussions of the issues facing Augustana College. Yeah, but again, that has to be a decision of the faculty, but I think it is fair for administrators to put that on the table.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, I hope this conversation has whetted your appetite on the subject of shared governance. All of us in our various administrative roles touch this subject daily in our work. And it becomes more important, as I mentioned, as you think about senior level and even CEO or president level kinds of positions where the board becomes a very much part of your daily life. Steve, Steve, your book, Shared Governance in Times of Change, still out there and doing well for AGB?
Yeah, but believe it or not, this, according to the AGB, was an academic bestseller. I envision, tens of thousands of copies being sold. I think it was 2,500, Lauren, as it qualifies as an academic bestseller. But this book is available at no charge through AGB to AGB members.
And if you're interested in following, I
Electronically.
urge you to track down a copy. It's a very good readable follow-up on the subjects of this past hour. Steve, we're grateful again, and we wish you the very best as you complete your victory lap, and then many good years ahead. I appreciated when you shared that part of your future includes teaching, because it's been among the most enjoyable aspects of your professional life.
Well, colleagues, once a teacher, always a teacher. So thank you. Thank you, Lauren and Tom.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you, Steve.
Bye. Oh, thank you.
Yay.
Well, I hope that lived up to your expectations. Steve is just so articulate on the subject of shared governance, and it is one of the truly wonderful and mysterious aspects of a life in higher education, is that we commit ourselves to live with it, and oftentimes spend a lot of time and angst complaining about it, but not much time thinking about it, analyzing it, and working systematically to improve it. And I certainly look in the mirror when I make that statement. And every time I listen to Steve, I think about all the things that I wish we had done at PLU while I was there, to work at making shared governance really as effective as it can be, when it's really quite a magnificent way to run an institution. We're at the end of our time for today. A couple of items as we wrap up. One is I want to go back and emphasize about those dates in May. If any of you have trouble, please send us an email and let us know. Those dates, May 20 to 22, correct?
Yep.
The second thing is tomorrow afternoon for our last session, we thought it might be interested to help ask you to help us construct the agenda. A number of you have said to us in these weeks, I really wish we had a chance to talk about this question or that question or this issue. And we'd like to take a set of those tomorrow afternoon and spend some time as a group dealing with them. Tom and I and Mary Ann and Diana would be available as resource persons for the conversation. We wondered if you would think about that this evening and tomorrow morning, and send us your questions, and we'll assemble a kind of leadership issues conversation for that last session tomorrow afternoon. We already have a number of issues that you've raised with us, but we'd like to hear additional ideas, and that will be the subject for our final session tomorrow afternoon at 1 p.m. Thanks for today. Tom, any other things on the windup?
Just Ann's still on, I hope. Ann sent me a quote for us to send out an email, but don't forget the fundamental question for the devotion tomorrow is to bring a vocation show and tell item to share. Can be a picture, song, tattoo, yeah, whatever works, poem, keepsake, book, something tangible that grounds your sense of call and your sense of why. Did I get that, Ann? Okay.
That's great.
And-
Thank you.
Sure. And we'll send an email reminding everybody about that.
Great. Have a good rest of the day. We'll see you tomorrow morning.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.